Reach out to those you fear. Touch the heart of complexity. Imagine beyond what is seen and risk vulnerability one step at a time. These are the words of well-known peace builder John Paul Lederach, and everywhere I go, they are words that seem to elude me in my faltering attempts to answer what on the surface appears to be a very simple question: what are you studying? Like most of my fellow students in this field, I usually answer peace and conflict transformation with a knowing grin that this will inevitably invoke a threefold response. First, either blank stares or intrigued awe, followed by the question, what is that? Which in time, after I've done my best to explain what I do indeed spend my time being shaped by, I inevitably face the question, so what are you going to do with that? I would like to suggest that this is the wrong question. I am grateful for my professors who have taught me to use my education to pursue beauty and wisdom and truth, and to allow these things to shape me. For I have discovered that who I am in turn reflects upon whatever it is I spend my time doing. A few weeks ago, what I was doing was folding letters and placing them into the front page of a journal being sent out to CMU supporters. And each time, I was met with the editor's opening words: Christians aren't born, they're made. And as I began to reflect on all the ways that this place and these people have made me, I discovered that it simultaneously answered the question of what are you studying? You see, all my classroom learning, my hands-on experiences, and hours spent with my nose in a book could be summarized to say that this place has shaped within me an active Christian peace-building imagination. So what is a Christian peace-building imagination, and why does it matter? When I came to CMU, I came wrestling through many tough questions about the nature of our world, after spending time in Latin America and with at-risk youth in Los Angeles. As young people let me into their stories of conflict and violence, what I came to see were systems and cycles that pulled disadvantaged people into violence, only to be met with solutions that actually perpetuated brokenness in our world. As a Southern Ontario farm girl, I soon found my faith in crises that I could never have anticipated, as the realities of racism, privilege, poverty, and injustice boldly confronted my beliefs about God and the church. You can imagine my surprise then to stumble on a Christian community that talks about justice as a restorative process, as a form of healing. And while this is what grabbed me in my intro PAX courses, what kept me there was that it soon taught me that this way of viewing the world extends far beyond the realm of justice, but is actually a way of seeing the world that breaks out of what appears to be narrow, short-sighted, and structurally determined ends. A way of viewing the world that looks at our brokenness, promises no conclusive solutions, and yet simultaneously dares to imagine our problems and our place in them differently. John Paul Lederach, in his book, The Moral Imagination, writes of this type of imagination as the capacity to imagine something rooted in the challenges of the real world, yet capable of giving birth to that which does not yet exist. Lederach paraphrases philosopher Bruno Bettelheim when he writes, "Violence is the behavior of someone incapable of imagining other solutions to the problem at hand." Walter Brueggemann, a renowned Old Testament theologian, in his book, The Prophetic Imagination, suggests that the dominant consciousness leads people to despair about the power to move toward a new life, and that it is indeed the task of prophetic imagination and ministry to bring people to engage the promise of newness that is at work in our history with God. Following the title of William Cavanaugh's book, The Theopolitical Imagination, I have also learned that the role of the church and the role of peace builders is born out of a deeply rooted enmity between humanity and before our Creator. Kavanaugh contends that not only is this a problem, but is the problem from which we need saving from. He reframes this concept of sin as the very act of being scattered into enmity between one another and before God. And as such, he outlines a view of salvation that moves from a purely individual perspective to a social one, where our return to God's intention can only come by restoring unity to one another through participation in Christ's body. To me, this is a beautiful picture. This restoration is the church, which explains why theologians like Yoder can emphatically declare that the church is a radical body simply by being this sort of living counter-narrative. The Christian peace-building imagination, then, is some sort of hybrid combination of a moral, prophetic, and theopolitical imagination that dares to imagine new stories, different stories than the broken ones that seem to be stuck on repeat. It is a way of being that draws on creativity and imagination and makes space for things that do not yet exist, while simultaneously acknowledging that this sort of promise of newness can be engaged only because God is at work. In this manner, it is an imagination that necessitates being rooted in a particular narrative called the church. And CMU has taught me about the beauty of the church in ways that I could not have anticipated, and perhaps also in ways that I suspect I will long owe many of you gratitude beyond what I can express here today. I would like to say 3 last things before closing. First, I'd simply like to reassure you that sometimes I do actually read books that don't contain the word imagination in the title. But they're boring. Secondly, realizing I'm running the risk of sounding very idealistic, I would just like to say that these things, this act of imagination, takes very tangible form and tension in my own life and work as I engage the brokenness in Canada between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. That is, as Lederach writes, at the heart of the on-the-ground realities where violent patterns have dominated our human affairs. Lastly, I would simply like to share with you a story. I just returned yesterday, actually, from 4 days in Montreal, where I was participating in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a gathering that creates space to hear the truth of our nation's genocidal history through the experiences of Indian residential school survivors. And then begins to imagine ways that we might move toward healing and reconciliation in our deeply divided context. The first day of the commission, we gathered in a park for the TRC's opening ceremony and prayers. And as we gathered in a time of prayer to the Creator, I was taught a real lesson about what it means to love our enemies. As all of us, Indigenous or non, were invited to participate in sacred ceremonies that our nation and ancestors once tried to extinguish. More incredible yet was that there, amidst the streets of Montreal, where church buildings have undergone a wave of secularism that has changed them into apartment buildings, bars, and hair salons, something beautiful and profoundly hopeful occurred. From our place in the circle, we were invited to throw cedar into the fire, and as a sign of our prayers rising up to the Creator, that He would be among us on our journey to reconciliation. Then suddenly, through the tall skyscrapers that Winnipeg can hardly fathom, in the heart of downtown Montreal, 3 eagles made their way into the city and appeared above us, circling overhead. In Mohawk culture, the eagle is considered to be a messenger sent by the Creator. And regardless of whether you believe this to be true or not, it was a holy space. Especially as an older Indigenous gentleman tapped me on the shoulder after the ceremony saying, "Did you see the eagles? Did you see the eagles?" I think I probably nodded, smiling, stammering out a yes. You see, sometimes there are words that seem to elude me in my faltering attempts to answer what on the surface appears to be a very simple question. And if I could answer his again, I think I would say that I hope there are more opportunities in the future where we might, as 2 people, see many more eagles and tangibly experience the message of our Creator's reconciliation. The question is, of course, whether we can dare to imagine this ourselves. Thank you.